Hello, my name is Geoff Trickey. I'm going to be describing to you the instrument which underpins the main part of the presentation that's going to be delivered by Steve Goldstein. I am the managing director of the company who developed the risk type compass. This is a personality-based psychometric that is focused in totally on people's disposition towards risk. And he, of course, has used it extensively in many coaching situations, and we'll understand what he has to say better, hopefully, if I can just give you a little background to the instrument involved. My company is PCL. It was established in 1992. We can claim many firsts, including being the first UK company to put personality profiling tools online, and that was way back 1999. Our approach has always been very research oriented, so we have done extensive personality research, collaborating with colleagues in the US and in Canada, and organizational research in companies such as BMW, Virgin Media, Karen Millen, Barclays, Clarks, and others. Our global reach is through the web service links that we provide, the partnership links, the distributor links, particularly with those other English-speaking countries. But we offer worldwide services for a range of global clients. Our involvement in risk stretches back about 5 years, and we originally became interested and involved because of the Financial Service Authority regulatory requirement for financial advisors to assess client attitudes towards risk as part of their advice about acquisitions and portfolios. And that is the direct trigger for the development of the risk type compass, which is a personality questionnaire, but focused on risk type, and for which we have well over 8,000 completions at this point. It's been of interest across many sectors. This is a number of the areas where we have been working with risk type compass: auditor training and accreditation, financial advising, of course, which is what it's intended for originally, board development, risk management, sports psychology, heavy industry, where the focus is very much on health and safety and on risk culture change. And of course, trader coaching, today's topic, and also for recruitment, most recently with air traffic controllers. Okay, well, in risk management, risk tends to be viewed as something out there, something that we need to avoid, some kind of a hazard or a danger. But it's not all out there. People themselves are a significant part of that equation. Daniel Kahneman, a prize winner in 2002 for his work on behavioral economics, identifies or drew our attention to the many biases that interfere with rational thought. And of course, in the financial world, we rely tremendously on personal judgment at all levels, because in the financial world where everyone's dealing with risk and there are no absolute measurements, it's all a question of estimation and personal judgment. In addition to Daniel Kahneman's work, quote just here on this slide very briefly, the UK government chief scientist in his recent report, 2014, which is about innovation and managing risk, not avoiding it. The point he makes is that decision-making draws on two brain systems. One is about the analysis and an analytic element, and the emotional side of things, and that our decisions are often made instinctively. So what is the relationship then between personality and risk? Risk, obviously, an aspect of behavior, and personality has a strong influence on our behavior. It isn't the sole factor, of course. We are sentient beings and we do have free will, but it's a very pervasive influence. In the diagram, we represent personality as the anchor, something fairly stable. Personality is pretty consistent over an adult working life. Behavior is much more variable, and that's indicated here by the fact that the boat in the illustration will rise and fall with the tide. It's subject to the winds and the weather, generally speaking. So this is rather like the relationship between personality and behavior. I mean, the point about personality, though, in relation to the other kind of influences on behavior, it is incredibly consistent. It's a very persistent factor in everything that we do. So when we describe someone as an introvert, doesn't mean to say that they are always behaving typically as an introvert might be expected to behave. They may well overcome their reticence and perform perfectly well in social situations, for example. And similarly with extroverts, who may learn to control their overbearing and garrulous talkative nature and let someone else get a word in edgeways. So a quick summary then about the relevance of personality. Personality doesn't choreograph your behavior, but it does have a very strong influence on it, particularly over a lifetime. You can see it over time more than perhaps minute by minute every day. It's about dispositions, and these dispositions exert a persistent and pervasive influence over how we behave. So as a consequence, we each have our own individual behavioral bias. So there are two key aspects of human nature that we are tapping into, and both of these are intimately related to decision making. Indeed, they're intimately related to survival of species and of organizations. The first of these factors then that we describe here as emotion. So we're all somewhere on a continuum between being very anxious, fearful, and pessimistic on one extreme, and at the other extreme, people who are calm, almost imperturbable, optimistic about everything. Nothing knocks them off their stride. The second factor is that we have a deep need to understand our environment, or more for some than for others, but we analyze our world and our situations. At the low end of that characteristic are people who are very excitement-seeking, spontaneous, impulsive. They don't look before they leap, and they actually enjoy uncertainty. You tell them what's happening tomorrow, they'll be disappointed. And at the other extreme, you have people who are very systematic. They won't do anything without preparation and permission. Okay, so those two factors then replicate pretty much what the chief scientific advisor was referring to in his two brain systems that are involved in decision making. And of course, all decision making involves some degree of risk. So that brings us then here in this slide to the basic foundations of the instrument that Steve has been using with traders, the risk type compass. Here we have two scales, one the emotional scale and one the analytic scale. At the one end of the emotional scale are the risk type that we describe as intense. So they are the anxious, fearful, alert to danger type people. And the other end of that same scale are people who are very calm and imperturbable, and you fall somewhere in between those extremes, inevitably. The other factor then, the analytic factor, at one end we have our prudent type who plan everything and do everything by the book, and at the other end, the carefree type are more spontaneous and innovative. So that's the basic four pure types, and because everyone falls somewhere on both of those scales, of course it's possible for you to be both intense and prudent, if we look at the top, or indeed carefree or composed. So that gives us our four additional types. The wary type at the top of your screen, these are people who have two reasons to be risk averse. They're both intense and anxious, and they also want everything organized and planned in advance. And at the bottom of your screen, the adventurous type has two reasons for being risk-taking. So they are both carefree and composed. So the people are happy-go-lucky, like to do interesting, exciting things, and because they're composed, they're not so sensitive to risk as the people at the other end of that scale. There are two other, what we would call complex scales, the excitable and the deliberate, and both of these have a combination of caution and comfort with risk. So it's very much, when you look at it through the lens of personality, not a simple matter of just being high risk taking or low risk taking. is quite complex, and the excitable are quite different from the deliberate, although both of them might be said to be average in terms of their overall appetite for risk. Okay, so that framework is what underpins the risk type compass. So this is the space in which you would be placed if you completed the assessment, and the red dot indicates this particular individual. So actually, I think you'll appreciate this is not absolutely a typology. It's really a 360-degree spectrum. And the typology is there really to help you navigate your way around it and to make sense of your position within that space. We consider it's rather like the numbers on a clock face. Time is actually continuous and unsegmented, but we divide it up to enable us to make more sense of where we are in the day. Okay, so the other thing to note about this, this model is that if you are a strong risk type, then your dot would appear very near the outer edge of the circle. You'll be a strong representative of that risk type, and the kinds of characteristics we would expect are very likely to be significant for you. On the other hand, if you're near the center, you'd be a weaker version of that risk type. People right in the middle, it's too close to call with any accuracy, although they probably do have a bias one way or another, so we don't like to allocate them to a risk type simply because they're near the middle on both the underlying scales. Okay, now this is just a couple of examples here to show how this works out in the real world. This is a sample of auditors portrayed here against the background of the risk type compass. The red line in the middle depicts the distribution of risk types in our total sample. And the blue line then encapsulates all of the people who are auditors within that space. And as you can see, most of the auditors then, the prevalence of auditors is very biased towards deliberate risk types. And what's also interesting is that none of our auditors in our particular sample were carefree at all. On a second example, just to illustrate it further, this is a sample of recruiters. Recruiters are much more common at the carefree side of the risk type compass. And as you can see, very few deliberate, very few prudent people, or risk types, sorry, I shouldn't use that word generically like that, maybe prudent or not prudent risk types that fall within the recruiting sample. I mean, those are just two examples. We could have talked about the police or IT or engineers or many of the other sectors in which we've worked. Okay, now this final slide then on the risk type compass shows you the distribution or the prevalence of risk types across our total sample. And as you can see, they're extraordinarily evenly distributed. So it's a very equal distribution of risk types. Every one of those has benefits and challenges. There are no good or bad risk types. Everybody brings something to the table. Evidently, as a species, evolutionarily speaking, every risk type has earned its right to survive. That's why we refer to it as Team Homo sapiens. Together, we have made it work. Okay, so in summary, briefly, risk type compass is about personality. It's about the persistent and pervasive influence that actually contributes to a behavioral bias, and we're all subject to some kind of behavioral bias in that sort of way. And the last point brings us exactly to where Steve will be focusing for the major part of this webinar, different strategies for different traders. Thank you.
Just a quick introduction. My name is Steven Goldstein. I'm a trader performance coach and executive coach. And former trader myself for 25 years. I work predominantly with investment bank traders, hedge fund traders and commodity traders, working on improving their performance, very much working on the behavioural aspects of trading, helping them to develop their trading so that improved performance turns out into improved returns, stronger P&L. Just going to go through very quickly. As I say, Geoff has taken you through the basics of the risk type compass. How do I use it as a coach? It's about developing performance, about helping traders, trading teams, trading businesses get ahead of the field by focusing on their behavioural characteristics. I compare it a little bit to developments in sports psychology, which revolutionised sport over the last 20 years. I think professional trading has never really focused so much on developing people's risk capabilities. People tend to have learned on the job, learned from other people, applied intellect, but never really developed their risk skills. So it's interesting that Risk Compass is one of the first tools that I found that actually assesses people based on their risk attitudes, which we can then present to our clients, which helps raise their self-awareness. When I talk about self-awareness, I'm going to bring on another image. This is the man on the mountain, and it reminds me of a quote from Sir Edmund Hillary. It's not the mountain we overcome, it's ourselves. In trading, in risk, in portfolio management, often it's not the markets we overcome, but it's ourselves. So that's very much the theory behind how I work as a coach. And Risk Compass is very much the tool that I use that runs through the program, that is able to create a dialogue between myself and the person I'm coaching, where they very much understand the terminology. There's no psychological terminology. We're not putting out letter codes such as ISTJ or whatever the various Myers-Briggs are. It talks a very plain and simple language, and that's actually the beauty of it. Now, the Risk Compass, I know our clients also use it for developing some of their risk management processes, improving those. Also, we use the coaching. Some clients are looking at our coaching together with the Risk Compass to help them raise their standards of performance and their standards within their business in line with regulatory requirements. For example, in the UK, we have the Fair and Effective Market Review, which is about raising standards within risk businesses. We also have the Senior Managers Regime, where businesses are looking to improve the knowledge of senior managers and their risk capabilities. And we know that also people are using it in HR, in job match, and in efforts to improve organisational culture. So there's a number of benefits from using the Risk Compass. Final aspect of it is team performance. We work with some companies on helping improve their understanding of the teams and the makeup of the individuals within the team, and how knowledge of that can make this risk team function more effectively. But I'm going to move on and take you through the Risk Compass, how I look at it from in terms of working with risk professionals. So on this particular example, we have an individual who would be denoted as the intense type, and I'll go through that more in a little bit. But what does this mean for risk taking and risk behaviours? I've actually split the Risk Compass up into various spheres or hemispheres. Now we notice that traders denoted in the northern side, or the upper hemisphere of the compass, tend to have a more defensive, more tactical approach to risk. Their attitude around risk is defined by their defensive nature. They have a lower risk tolerance and are more risk averse. On the contrary, people denoted in the lower half of the Risk Compass have a more purposeful and strategic perspective when it comes to risk. They are more risk-seeking, they have a higher risk tolerance. Around the middle third of it, people are pretty well balanced between the two. Likewise, looking from right to left, we find that people on the right-hand side of the compass tend to be more objective and methodical in their approach to risk. Their decision-making processes are more based in logic. That doesn't mean they don't use intuition in it, but there is a stronger bias towards logic over intuition. On the contrary, on the left-hand side, we find risk takers, risk managers, traders, more subjective, more arbitrary, more discretionary in their approach. They tend to use intuition far more in their risk making. Doesn't mean they don't use logic, but they have a stronger bias towards using intuition. So how does this play out? How does this affect individual behaviours? The next graphic here is part of a larger graphic we produced, which shows the upside traits that we've observed amongst traders of various different types. So if I was to present someone who's denoted as the intense type, we would notice that they tend to bring a lot of passion to their work. As a result of that, they tend to be also fearful of failure. This can be a strong though, this can be a motivating force, and as such they invest a lot of energy and they prepare carefully in their work. This also means that they tend to be highly in tune with markets and market movements. They stay very close to the markets and to price action. And as such, they're alert to risks and opportunities that present themselves amongst the flow, from the flow, and from the noise that is there in the market. Again, if you're one of the intense type, you'll also share some of the attributes with your neighbouring types. So the wary type is often highly analytical and detailed. They're very vigilant to threats, and they're very thorough with their market analysis and risk management. The other side of the intense type is the excitable type. Perhaps excitable is not always a term that people like to associate with in trading, so we like to think of it as more spontaneous, intuitive, responsive. Now these people are very flexible, very agile. They react rapidly to new information, new news, new data, and they have a very strong sense of intuition. So the intense type will also share some of these upside traits of the excitable types. There are also some observed downside traits, and I'm going to move on to this. So each type has downside traits. The intense type, they tend to be, we'd say, erratic and overly self-critical. You know, once again, they're fearful of failure, and this can cause them at times to remain maybe too far or too long inside their comfort zones. We see this sometimes where traders of the intense type might not be utilising their risk fully, and at times undersizing their risk. They also tend to dwell on bad outcomes, which can impact their self-belief, can impact their confidence, and can also affect their ability to hold risk. They also have high levels of emotion, which at times of feverish market activity can interfere with rational decision making. Likewise, they share some of the elements associated with a wary type, who tend to be prone to elevated levels of anxiety and nervousness. This can make them hesitant and indecisive. And some of the attributes of the excitable type, so that they suffer from mood swings, which can impact decision making and behaviours, and they can often be involved in making sometimes too many hasty, irrational decisions. Just as a little bit of openness here, as a trader, I was denoted as one of the intense types, and that pretty much matched my character as a trader. Saying that, we're not going to say that any particular type is necessarily more successful than any other type. And I'm going to show you in the next graphic exactly what I mean. On this graphic, we've been using the risk compass about a year now. We've analysed probably over 100 people. We've removed some of the traders who hadn't taken our associated questionnaire, and we've also removed traders with less than 5 years experience, to remove those who are perhaps not yet proved their mettle and proved their worth. So what we have now is we have a graphic which overlays all 60 traders that have made it past boot camp as far as we're concerned. These are senior traders. In most cases, they're 10 to 20 years experience. In some cases, that they're even longer than that. And they're from various asset classes. The red circles are FX, blue would be rates and fixed income. We have some commodity and energy traders in there, credit traders, equity, and then traders who are defined as cross asset. So as you can see, these are all successful traders in their own right, and they're pretty evenly spread out amongst the compass. What I'm going to look now is certain patterns and clusters which start to reveal themselves. And I'm going to also talk about isolated individuals that we've come across. Just to make another point, as Geoff made it clear, the closer you are to the centre of the compass, the more you're a milder type of that form of that type. And the closer you are to the edge, and close to the edge is quite a good term, the more you're an extreme form or strong form of that type. But as I say, that doesn't necessarily inhibit anyone. So this next graphic, I've identified 3 individuals, all extremely successful individuals, all work for major hedge funds. all achieve a very different way of approach to their trading to achieve success, and all have very different forms of risk aversion. The guy at the top is highly risk averse, although I would point out that he's probably the most successful trader out of anyone we've assessed yet. He's an FX trader, works for a hedge fund. In 2014, his profit alone was over $100 million. Last year, his profit was close to $100 million. The guy on the bottom left hand also works for a hedge fund, a carefree individual, doesn't really use much logic. We analyze these traders as well to find out what are the underlying characteristics they use in their decision-making processes. And this one was very low on logic, but very high on some of the creative aspects. But as you can imagine, he has quite a volatile P&L and has to be managed slightly differently from his colleagues by his risk managers. And then we have a guy who's a great example of the deliberate type, equity trader, takes a long-term view of the market, very fundamental. But I'm going to go through some of these aspects really to look at patterns that we have identified so far. Conscious that 60 traders isn't a huge sample group. We hope as we build up this data over the next year or two that we'll start to corroborate some of the patterns we're seeing already. So now what we've looked at is we've identified everyone as buy side or sell side. The green is the sell side market makers. Dark blue are traders, portfolio managers from the buy side. Green and blue are traders who are from the sell side but take a buy side approach. Either proprietary traders, or we like to call them strategic traders now. More often managers, people who have to be proactive in managing the book, although they are from a market making or sell side in investment banks. Now, one of the obvious patterns that we're identifying, and I'm going to use highlight that here, is that a lot of the market makers are showing up in the top left-hand corner of this compass: wary, intense, excitable. This kind of fits in with what you would expect from market makers. That they have to be highly reactive to the market. They can be long and they can be short, depending on how they get put into a trade by their clients. They have to be extremely good risk managers. You know, you could have someone hit you in $5 million of a particular asset group. You could have a client hit you in $200 million. So you've got to be very strong on risk management. You've got to be highly responsive. You can't be too planned because you're not necessarily going to have the same position as you go through the day. So, you know, we say that these guys are subjective, they're arbitrary, they use intuition. They also are risk averse. Like we say, they're going to be put into trades by their clients. They've got to be very quick to react to that. They're defensive, they're tactical, they're towards the upper side of the compass. Next, I've removed the risk. I've removed the market makers at this stage because I just want to look at people who are proactive in taking risk. I've kept in the market makers, the managers, because these guys tend to be more proactive. And I now want to look, with these guys removed, at people's overall approach to trading. And we've classified people into three groups: directional traders, who are denoted in purple; spread traders, these are typically long-short traders; relative value traders, traders who have a portfolio approach, these are denoted in the light brown circles; and then option traders, volatility traders, denoted in blue. And there's some patterns or clusters which are really quite evident as you look at that. Let's highlight the first one. The first one are directional traders, but we've identified these as in the lower half. These tend to be directional traders who have a more longer term perspective. So not surprisingly, they're highly risk-seeking. They're also very purposeful and very strategic about how they take risk. Also slightly veering to the left-hand side, more intuitive than objective, we're noticing, with the directional traders. Next, we have another cluster of directional traders. This is a little bit of a smaller cluster, but these are very short-term directional traders, often holding risk no more than 1 or 2 days. Again, they're biased towards the left-hand side, intuitive. As you can see, I've included the FX trader I mentioned earlier, the hedge fund. And he really is quite extreme in terms of the wary type, highly risk averse. But nonetheless, there's also quite a lot of those who are in the middle, and you can see this on the next cluster. If we group them together, there's quite a lot who are well balanced between being both logical and objective and intuitive and subjective. But there clearly is a bias towards the intuitive, subjective side from these discretionary traders. The next cluster to highlight are the spread traders, relative value, have a portfolio approach. Again, veering towards the tactical defensive side. They tend to run hedge portfolios. They tend to try and avoid a lot of the noise and volatility that there's there in the market. And I guess at the moment it's extremely difficult to ignore that in the current climate. But that's what these guys are doing. They're trying to hedge that volatility element out quite often. There's two clusters here. I've not identified them separately, but there's a group around the middle, and these are more moderate risk takers. Actually, a lot of this group work for one particular global macro fund. They tend to be long-term traders, and they tend to, as we say, they tend to be well balanced between being risk averse and risk seeking. And then there's another group who are more towards the defensive tactical side, a little bit more spread out across the risk compass. The final group I'm identifying here, and I'm conscious this is only a small group, but they seem to be clustering quite well together. These are the option traders. Now, not surprisingly, there's a clear bias towards the right-hand side of the risk compass, with one exception, and I'll talk about that a little later. But these are objective, they're methodical, they're logical. They're also biasing towards the lower side of the risk compass. They're purposeful, they're strategic, they have a good risk tolerance. That's not a surprise if you know anything about options and running an option portfolio. You have to monetize that by really trying to take the spread out, that when you get hit, you cannot try and cover every single time you quote a price, but you try and build up a portfolio and you try and draw the risk out of that by managing that rather than trading with each individual move. A couple of guys I'd like to sort of note that stood out a little bit. This individual over here, when he originally responded to our questionnaire, informed us that he was a spread trader. However, when we started working with him, it became clear that actually, although he trades a spread product, he's very much a directional trader. So it was interesting that this, what seemed like an outlier at first, was actually turned out to fit in with what we're seeing from some of the other data when we knew more about this individual. This individual here, another outlier, very much from the option traders. This is a portfolio manager at a fund. He used to be a market maker on options at a bank, and he worked with a team, a very successful team. This individual, very bright. When he's gone on his own to take his work to a hedge fund and he's away from that team, he's struggled. And the interesting thing is that, being the intense type, maybe that doesn't accord with being an options trader. Maybe, as we said, an options trader needs to be a little bit more long-term, a little bit more composed about how they take risk and how they look at risk and how they view risk. This individual, very much getting swept up in the to and fro of the market, the ebb and flow. So as a coach, I'm now working with this individual to see if we can somehow change his method, make him more self-aware of what his plus points are and what his challenges are. And it's very much a work in progress, but this is something that, it shows how both the risk compass identifies people within a group and how we work with them to try and perhaps improve their performance through making some sort of adjustment. The next graphic, we're looking at average holding periods. Not surprisingly, we're looking at short-term traders up to 2 weeks, denoted in red. And clearly these are clustering towards the left-hand side. They're more subjective, more discretionary, more using intuition. On the other side, we've got medium long-term traders. With these again are a little bit spread around. They are clearly towards the objective methodical side and have a stronger risk-seeking bias. One or two outliers here, special cases. I probably haven't got time to go through these now, as I want to move on with this presentation. Very quickly looking at analytical decision-making processes. What analytical processes people do when they're taking. This cluster here are technical traders, people who use price action and act in a discretionary way to understand the market and try and extract value from it. On the other side, we've got quantitative systematic traders. Now, both these groups tend to use price action. They tend to be defensive and tactical. They tend to use price action to extract value from the market. So they're very analytical approach. There are a few exceptions. One or two of these quantitative guys look more at the fundamentals behind perhaps maybe economics and use that to create their model. And these guys are probably more risk-seeking. They're around the middle there. On the other hand, we've got fundamental traders. Again, pretty well balanced, but clearly they're more big picture thinkers. And not surprisingly, they're towards the lower side, the more strategic, purposeful, risk-seeking side of the risk compass. The final group we have here are instinct-driven and traders who have a hybrid approach. They bring in technical analysis, they'll use some quantitative analysis, they'll use fundamentals, and they'll also listen to the noise of the market. Clearly, there's a bias here towards being more intuitive, and also a bias towards being more risk-seeking for these guys. So this is the overall spread of all the traders we've looked at. Coming back to this across the group we've assessed so far. I'm going to just look at. I had one other slide which isn't on here yet. It was about. There's another aspect of the risk compass called risk tolerance. There's a risk tolerance index, and it identifies each group by a number, what their average level of risk tolerance is. What's interesting is that we've noticed that traders in the upper side of the upper group, the intense, wary, and prudent group, are actually modifying upwards on their risk tolerance index, and traders on the lower side are moderating their risk tolerance down. So it's like there's an adjustment going on, adjustment process amongst traders. Those who have a more risk-averse approach are taking steps to become more risk-seeking, and those who have a more risk-seeking bias are taking steps to actually be more moderate in their risk-taking. Now I'm going to look at teams here. So this particular team is a group of senior portfolio managers at one of the global macro funds we work with. This is one of the, probably defined as one of the world's leading macro funds. They wanted to understand the DNA of their firm, the type of traders they employ. As you can see, amongst this A group, there's a very strong cluster around a deliberate approach. These are moderate risk takers. They're large risk takers, but there is a moderation between risk aversion and risk seeking here. So obviously there's a strong risk management approach, but they're quite willing to take large sizes of risk. There are a couple of outliers here, although the wary one is very moderate, so we're not going to call that a particularly large outlier. But this carefree individual, he has a very, very different emphasis on risk to the other guys. This brings a nice bit of diversity to the firm. It's also interesting that they manage him very differently. His P&L does not move in line with these other guys. Interestingly, I think it should show up on the next slide. I wanted to show you an individual who we were coaching at a bank, who then moved to join this hedge fund. So this individual here highlighted in red, we were working with him at the fund, very bright guy. Suddenly we found that he's turned up at this fund we're working at. Now our instant thought was, maybe this guy's not right for this fund. You know, he's the excitable nature, he's spontaneous. He doesn't really fit in with the DNA of this fund. Turned out he lasted 3 months. His performance suffered, which means they suffered. So it just shows that sometimes it can be important to understand the DNA of people and the DNA of people you're selecting, the risk type of people you're selecting. I'm going to move on to the next slide now, which should be coming up in a second, which is another major global macro fund we work with. Now this will have a very different a different set of spread of traders. This is the top six portfolio managers in this fund. And this fund likes a diverse approach. They don't like everyone to have the same approach. And as you can see, this particular fund has achieved great success over the last couple of years. They made significant double-digit returns in 2014. And even last year, when a lot of hedge funds performed very poorly, they achieved very close to double-digit returns. So, you know, they like to have a diverse approach to their people. And also they manage the risk of each person very differently. So it can be important, it can be useful, because if you manage people with diverse approaches, you get more out of those. Now I'm going to move the next slide on to, which highlights a team within an investment bank that I've been working with. And you can highlight the three very different characteristics of individuals within this team. So you've got the leader of the team, who's a very strong risk taker. He takes and he holds on to most of the risk. Two other individuals, one's a very moderate risk taker, but very strong on liquidity management. He's the intense type. And then you've got the wary type, who's very, very detailed, very strong on detail, very strong on analysis, very strong on the risk management of the team. Now, this team is a highly effective team. They've achieved some great results over the last 2 years. And really, you can see that having these different risk types working together is a very powerful combination. Interestingly, that this team used to be 8 traders, and they performed very poorly. The bank reduced it down to 1 and then added these 2 other traders. And since then, they've been performing really strongly. Interestingly, I was working with the line manager of this group, who at first actually wanted to reward them separately because he felt that the strong risk taker was the guy taking all the risk, and he should have a much bigger portion of the pie. Let me explain that actually these 2 other ones are equally contributing in different ways. He reassessed this, and he later spoke to the individuals in the team and realised that had he gone through that process, he would have broken up the team and would have done a lot of damage. So understanding risk type can be really important. And there's another team at another firm, a commodity trading firm I work with. Now helping that team understand each other's strengths, weaknesses, how their dispositions are, proved very successful last year when this team had to unwind a major position. The manager reflected to me that, you know, understanding each person's different nature was hugely empowering in that unwind. And he reckons that they actually, as a result of that, they reduced a potential loss of 10 million in their books to just a loss of 2.5 million. So understanding risk compass can be really powerful in understanding your team makeup and team DNA. I'm going to move on now, really, just to sum this up. What are the major benefits of using risk compass and using it with coaching? It's about accelerating people's performance, developing their performance, developing their risk intelligence, how they are as decision makers, improving team working, inter-team performance, and helping to generate stronger P&L. There's also many advantages for using risk compass in terms of the organisational risk culture, developing better risk behaviours on the front line, and helping to conform to regulatory efforts and raising standards within the risk business. And then there's a human resource side of it, learning and development, developing organisational culture, employee engagement. I mean, that's a huge aspect which has come out of the work I've done, that businesses are reflecting to me that, you know, people who have been through the coaching programs are far more engaged as employees with the organisation, and as are their managers actually. And also improving selection and job matching. So that's it really. That's my section. We've got 10 or 15 minutes left, which I'm going to hand back to Jackie, and we're going to take some questions and answers from people if they have them. You can answer questions in the chat section or submit them to Jackie.
Okay.
And there's a slide with my contact details there if anyone would like that.
Thanks very much, Steve. Yes, we have got time for a few questions. So starting off, this one for Geoff. So does risk type change over time or with experience?
Oh, thanks, Jackie. The basis for the risk type compass is personality, and the research over the last 15, 20 years, global research suggests that personality, as we measure it through this kind of methodology, remains really very consistent from the point really when the brain is fully matured. So that's around the age of 20, 19, 21, that sort of era, and until you get a bit aged. I mean, there's a trajectory through life, but it's slow and predictable. So that the people who are very, very anxious when they are younger, that tends to moderate somewhat as they get older. And it's very consistent. It doesn't mean to say, as I said before, that there aren't other factors that influence your risk behavior. And of course there are. But as I said also, the thing about the risk type is that is ticking away all the time. And it's always pulling you, like if you remember the anchor and the yacht picture, it's always pulling you back around your sort of center of gravity as far as risk taking is concerned.
Okay, thanks, Geoff. So this one for you, Steve. If a person's risk type doesn't fit with a particular role, are they likely to perform better in a different trading role?
That's an interesting one, and I think I alluded to that a little bit. I think it depends how far away they are, and you know, we do have examples of people who are doing exceptionally well in a job, where perhaps they're not necessarily the right fit. But we find that if people are diametrically opposed to that and are trading the wrong method, then that can be problematic, and it's very hard. You know, I do get some people ask me when I'm coaching them that, you know, particularly when I show them the risk compass and I ask them to do the test, and you know, I get an individual who says, "Oh, I'm the intense type. I'd like to be the composed type," or I'm the prudent type. I'd like to be a little bit more carefree, able to take a little bit more risk. And I actually say to people, you can't be what you're not. But what you can do is you can learn to add certain behaviours and habits, which perhaps make, you know, those things which you don't have are often some of the challenges which you can develop to improve your risk taking. But actually, you want to stay where your strengths are. You know, if you're the excitable type, you're incredibly intuitive. You're incredibly good at trading short-term and fast markets. I say to people, really go where your strength is, leverage your strengths, understand your weaknesses, and try and learn how to either avoid them or work around them, or create strategies which offset them. So yeah, I think it's quite important to try and trade close to your type. But there are always people who manage to do the opposite. I call it a little bit like learning to write with the other hand. But I don't, you know, you're always going to require a lot more effort to write with your left hand if you're right-handed, and you're very likely to be quite as competent.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Okay, another question. Do you suggest a balance of risk types within teams? So, Geoff, could you take that one?
Yeah. Well, I think Steve's touched a little bit on this as well. I think the thing about team building is it's something that the manager has to think about, isn't it? I mean, Arsene Wenger probably is even now thinking, oh, sorry, international audience. He's probably thinking about who he's going to play on Saturday when he meets Chelsea, or is it Sunday, actually? But anyway, you know, all you can do is help people understand what's available to you, and to identify what's most appropriate for a situation. I think the general, not just talking about trading now, but generally in group situations, it's quite an advantage, usually, particularly if you're working collaboratively, to have people who bring something else to the table. I mean, if everybody in the team is exactly the same risk type, then you're very limited then in your flexibility. And I said at the end of my piece, I think the point is that we are team Homo sapiens. So it's in a lot of situations where having some people who are rather more risk averse, who will challenge the ones who are more gung ho and arrive at a better solution for that reason, is a good thing. But I do think it's a managerial responsibility. Through the risk type compass, you know what's at your disposal. You have to decide what team to play, and over time to think about how you might improve a team, what the strengths are, where you need to bring in something to complement something else. I think it's that sort of situation. And it is an art. I mean, that isn't science. When it gets down to that level, then it's down to the intuition and the wisdom of the team leader to make what use they can of the information that we can make available to them. Is that okay?
Yeah, great. Yeah. And so another question here. Have you done any assessment of the success of traders and the risk types of their clerks or execution guys?
No, but there's an interesting one that I've recently started working with someone who is a proprietary trader at a hedge fund. He used to be doing execution at a different hedge fund, and as being involved in execution, he was outstanding in that role, and he's the intense type. Now he's gone on to work at a hedge fund, where this particular hedge fund has more of a macro view. They tend to take longer term perspectives, and he's slightly challenged here because it's not quite fitting in. That method of trading or approach is not quite fitting his type. You know, he was outstanding as an executioner, but not quite achieving the same level as a prop trader. And that is something that, as a coach, I'm going to have to work with and see if I can try and help him make that leap or make that adjustment, or maybe even find an approach which is more conducive to him monetizing risk and achieving success in his role.
Thanks, Steve. So another question here. If personality and risk type do not appear to dictate success, what point are you serving in modifying behavior, i.e. is experience the significant factor?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, experience is a significant, it's a very significant factor. I mean, you know, if you think of any situation which when you first encounter it is unfamiliar, in other words, you haven't got any experience, then it's almost more, if you are an anxious person, it's that much more anxious a situation. I mean, we resolve our anxieties and our fears by familiarizing ourselves with things. And so, of course, experience is really important. Knowing your way around is very important. I mean, just to go back to a more general sort of comparison from business psychology, broader business psychology, you'll find people who are very anxious people, socially anxious people, but who can do brilliant presentations if they're talking about something that they know inside out, where they know that they know more than you do, and therefore in that sort of circumstance they're very happy. Now that's down to learning and experience. So your risk type is always moderated within any particular domain by the experience and the familiarity you have with it, and so that you're not in uncharted territory to start with. But then after that, it is going to be at greater expense. You know, we said, my example earlier on was about introverts behaving as extroverts in a way, but we all have to modify our behavior to make ourselves socially acceptable. We might start off life as a screaming, tantruming little child, petulant, somebody who wants, you know, immediate gratification, as Freud has pointed out, and various others. You know, we learn how to behave, and we learn how to deal with situations that we have to deal with. Of course, a huge number of people don't succeed as traders. I'm not sure what the proportion is. Steve can probably tell us, but I believe it's over 90% of people who make some sort of entry into trading who actually don't survive. So, I mean, I think that's the other side of the point that's being made. It's a valid point, but I think also there are people who don't ever get to that point where they understand enough to compensate for whatever it is that they haven't got. Is that covering the question? We don't know who asked that, do we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so another one that we've had through here is what test did you use to determine if a trader falls into a particular category? So, Steve, do you want to just talk a little bit more about how you go about assessing the traders through the risk type compass?
Well, in terms of the categories, I assume they mean whether they're a spread trader, whether they're relative value trader, option trader. We send out a questionnaire when we send out the risk compass test, the online risk. We send out an online questionnaire. So it's people's people's own subjective views of what type of trader they are when they respond to that. And there's been a few examples where we've then qualified that after we start coaching. So in some cases, we've refined those responses a little bit, but in nearly all the cases, it's from the questionnaire that they were given.
Great.
I hope that helps.
Lovely, thanks, Steve, and thank you everyone for all the questions. So that is the end of the webinar now. We will be posting a copy onto the PCL website at Psychological Consultancy Ltd, and we will also send you a link to that via email. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.